starting in third position is something that I had never thought of before. And when I heard Francois talk about it last year, I was like, oh, that makes sense, you know? Being able to teach all 6 positions right away instead of thinking that's hard, I can't play up high, and having songs that they know and that they like instead of just abstract sort of things. There are just so many benefits to using that.
Today, we are featuring someone that I see as one of the young rising stars in the bass world. I'm Jason Heath. This is Contrabass Conversations, and we are chatting today with Grace Lewis, who I've gotten to know over the past couple of years. I did a live event with her in Dallas in January of 2018, and I've had several people recommend that I get in touch with her for an interview, including Mitch Mooring, who helps produce these episodes. So Grace and I sat down, had a wonderful conversation about teaching, about her studies. She's actually in the middle of her master's program as we record this at the University of Houston with Dennis Whittaker, former podcast guest. She studied before that at Oklahoma City University with John Schimek. And she has been to numerous bass events, which we talk about. We talk about practice routines, about technique practice, abstract technique, where Grace sees herself in the future, career aspirations, to do a performance degree or not, and all the factors surrounding that. So many great topics. I know you'll enjoy this conversation. I want to give a shout out to our sponsors, D'Addario Strings, Upton Bass, Robertson and Sons, and A440. More on them later, but let's dive into this conversation with Grace Lewis.
Hey, Jason, how are you?
I'm good, Grace. How are you?
I'm well, thanks.
You're in Kansas City right now?
Yes, I am.
Cool.
I just finished up with the KC Bass Workshop.
How was it?
It was fabulous. It was such a great experience.
I was following along a bit with you, with some other folks on Instagram and on Facebook. It looks like such a great time. I wish I still lived in Chicago, because I would totally. It's just a little bit more of a haul from San Francisco to Kansas City.
Right. Yeah, I drove here from from Atlanta last year, so that was a pretty long one too. But now being in Houston, it's a little bit more accessible. So.
Well, I think it was Lloyd Goldstein was there, right? This year?
He was.
I think Lloyd's got probably the longest, or he must, unless it's somebody coming from overseas, because doesn't he drive it from South Florida?
Yes, I think actually he just, he was telling me about his bass being converted to a removable neck, so he actually flew this year for the first time.
Okay.
So I guess we sort of switch roles in that way. But so he came pretty far, and he's got a student that drove from out there as well. So
whoa,
worth it.
Yeah. Wow. Well, it's he's told me all about that bass, and is super thrilled. And he's such a great guy. I'm going to be seeing him actually in a couple weeks in Italy. Yeah, for bass Europe. So that's going to be exciting. A lot of fun. Yeah. What else are you up to this summer? You headed back to Atlanta after this, or just chilling out?
Actually, no.
Okay.
Yeah, so right after this, I'm going to Oklahoma City to assist with John Schimek's bass camp at Oklahoma City University. And after that, I'm going back to Houston. I'm going to make a move to a new apartment and then just prep for the semester coming up.
Okay.
Yeah.
I just saw. It's funny because I was going through thinking about us talking today. We have like 26 shared connections at least.
Yes.
You know, like John Schimek is somebody. When I used to teach, it seems like a lifetime ago at University of Wisconsin Whitewater, and John got connected with a couple of my students and invited them down to the camp, and they had the most wonderful time. And I think the reason why they kind of ended up ditching what they were doing and going into music was in large part because of that camp. So
right. Yeah. That's my story too.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah. So I went to school with him during my undergraduate degree. But I've known him since I was 12. I think he came to Virginia where I lived, and he did a bass day there in Virginia Beach. And then I sort of got enticed to come to those camps too. And I went for like 3 or 4 years as a student. And I just loved it, and I was really interested in going there for school as well.
Wow. Okay. So I was curious how you got connected with Oklahoma City University. And I know it's a wonderful school. Anybody who's gone to that bass convention a decade ago knows how beautiful it is. But if someone's not from Oklahoma, they might think of that as a very mysterious sounding part of the country, you know?
Yes.
What are those rectangles?
A bit of a hidden gem, I think.
How old were you when you started playing bass?
I was 8 years old.
Wow. Did you come from piano or violin, or was it bass from the get-go for you?
Well, I took a year of piano lessons, but that was like way before. But I lived in Fairfax County at the time, and the school that I went to, I guess in Northern Virginia, I think they start their kids on instruments in third grade. So I got to see one of those orchestra instrument petting zoos, and the teacher played the bass for us, and I just was so excited about how different the tone was from everything else, and that I could play low. And so I said I wanted to do it, and they were like, no, you're way too small. You have to play the cello. And I said, no, I'm going to play the bass. So I did. I got a quarter size rental, and that's how I started.
Okay, so you started at a quarter size, and were you taking and Fairfax County? That's like suburban DC for folks who don't know. Oh, and I'll just throw this in. I just start talking to people, and this thing just starts whenever it starts. So I don't know. So I guess we started, but I had folks go through and edit. So if you want to go, I mean, you're a very well spoken person, but if you want to say anything again, it's totally a safe space. So feel free. It's the so. And also, it's you've actually been on. I have this long list of people that are suggested. You've actually been suggested several times. And
really,
yeah,
I'm surprised by that. Honestly, thank you.
I could go back and trace where exactly, but the most recent one was Mitch Mooring, and he said
you contacted me earlier this year as well. Yeah.
So that's great. So just shout out to Mitch. So were you taking lessons once you started, or were you just playing in the schools? How did that work for you?
Well, it's kind of an interesting story. So I was lucky enough, I guess this is lucky, I don't know. I was the only bass student starting that year, and the teacher was Mary Wagner, who I think has made a lot of difference in the music education in that area of the state. But she's a bassist, and so I was able to work with her one-on-one, which I think was not by design, but I was lucky to just have that sort of really intimate connection and get to really have my fundamentals down early. But then, so we were an Army family, and so we moved every few years. And so, let's see, after fourth grade, I moved to Southern Virginia in the Virginia Beach area. And it's different there. You need to start in sixth grade. So in fifth grade, they start the other strings, but not the bass. So I took private lessons with Tom Reel from the Virginia Symphony for that year. And then the orchestra director at the middle school said, as long as you're in private lessons, then you can come in sixth grade. So that's what I did.
And is that where you met John Schimek? Was he out on the East Coast doing some master classes, or how did that connection happen again?
So he does these bass days where he'll travel to an area of the country and then go to a school and have everybody from, that region or that district sign up who wants to come and spend a day playing the bass. It's kind of like a mini version of camp, really. And so I signed up, I want to say it was in seventh or eighth grade whenever I was 12, but that was super cool. So we just spent the whole day doing like technique and then different types of classes like jazz, and we had an all-state clinic, and then we did bass ensembles at the end, and then we ended it with a bass orchestra. So that's how I met him.
John is somebody, if people don't know, he teaches at Oklahoma City University. He's the next president of the ISB, International Society of Bassists. And it's funny, I was actually in June, last month, I was giving him some tech help, and it ended up turning into this 2-hour conversation. And I wish I had my microphones, because he's got such an interesting background as. I mean, he's as well known as a conductor and music educator as he is as a bassist. I think, he's done almost every state's all-state orchestra. And I've had a couple students go to the camp and just rave about their experiences. Tell me about studying with John. What's John like as a teacher? How would you describe him to somebody who doesn't know him?
Mm. So I think I was really lucky to have him as a teacher. Well, I did my bachelor's degree in performance, and I'm doing my master's in performance now, but I'm really interested in teaching as well. And I think that over the years, during my time with him, I picked up like all these little isms and just ways to teach that he used on me. And then he would say, I'm just telling you this, so that you can use it when you teach. And I just find myself over and over again going back to those things and using those tips and tricks. But I think he's great at making it fun for students, and it doesn't matter what age. There's like a little bit of mystique to it, but also just a lot of like, oh, you're right, that makes sense. Oh, that's a great idea. And when I would say, like, that's a great idea, he'd say, oh, I have those from time to time, but I need to write that in my calendar, So I think he prepared me really well for just being able to approach any performance opportunity that came to me and just make it work, and just to have a good presence and just be ready for anything.
Did you have, so I too have performance undergrad, performance masters from, it seemed disturbingly a long time ago, it seems now. I started it in 1994. But I remember my parents having deep concerns about performance as a career path. Was there any doubt in your mind? And I know you're still kind of in the middle of it, but was that it for you from the get-go? Did you have any other things you were exploring? Just talk about your experiences so far studying bass performance. I know that's a super huge topic, but
no, that's okay. I think that's something that you hear a lot from people when you tell them that you're going into performance, like, are you sure you don't want to teach, or something like that? Or do you have a backup plan? But, well, I will say when I was a younger student, like maybe early years of high school, I wasn't sure if I wanted to do music as a career, even though it was like the main sort of focus of my life since I was 8. And I did consider like maybe a psychology major or maybe education because I've always been really interested in teaching. But when I was a junior in high school, I started at the Governor's School for the Arts, which is in Norfolk. And that experience sort of locked it in for me. And I was like, oh yeah, this is it. Like I cannot do anything else. It's going to be music. And I've always sort of believed that the idea that you can make a career out of it is not true because there are so many opportunities. And I think you just need to know how to be a good business person and how to sort of market yourself and be able to take many opportunities and compile them into a career. It's not one of those things where you just pick one activity and you just do it for 20 years or whatever. You need to be active in many areas. So.
Well, and I see in you somebody who's already got those skills. I think you represent yourself very well. We don't know each other that well, but we met in person in January doing a camp with Kate Jones in Dallas, but I obviously you've been very successful already building up a private studio in Houston, and you just finished your first year of your master's, right?
I did.
Oh, okay. So you're balancing being in school, you're balancing what looks like a pretty full studio already and performing and all that sort of thing. How did you establish yourself as a teacher in Houston? I think that'd be an interesting thing to dig into. Like you moved to a new town. Yeah. What'd you do to build a studio?
Okay, so there are a couple factors in that. So Dennis Whittaker is my teacher right now, and he's been an amazing guide in that endeavor. I remember a conversation I had with him on the phone before I actually moved down to Houston. I was like prepping and sort of working about how is everything going to go and what's it going to be like as a master's student and a teacher. And he helped me like come up with this great plan for how to structure a private studio, because I'd had, a one or two students before when I was in Oklahoma, but never anything like now. I'm going to have 30 kids next year, or this coming semester. So he helped me just lay it out. And also the way it works in Houston is a little different from some other areas of the country, I think. So you need to get on a vendor list for a school district, and then they distribute your name on this list of teachers, the magic list. And then the teachers can either contact you or you can contact them. And then you go and teach the lessons in the school. So he sort of helped me learn the rope there. And then I started to just call people that were teachers on those lists and just connect with them. I had a colleague who I went to undergrad with who's teaching in that area now. So she helped me as well I think she was my first teacher to sign her kids up. And aside from that, the KC Bass Workshop has been really big in helping me learn the pedagogy that I use with my students now. I didn't know too much about the Vance method before this past year, but that was a great course in that. And so like Johnny Hamill's work has been really instrumental as well.
Yeah, well, I agree 100% on that in the Vance pedagogy. I've been such a fan of those books, progressive repertoire of the books. If people aren't familiar, but you should be familiar because they're great. I'll tell you, I used to teach solely from Simandl and break out my Marcello E minor sonata and Capuzzi in F, and not that there's anything wrong with any of that, but I there was such a dramatic difference in I think my students' enjoyment of the lessons, their progress, my enjoyment of the lessons when I started to move over to that. What do you like about the Vance pedagogy, about the Roboth / Vance pedagogy? What resonates with that for you?
So I was also a Simandl student as well growing up, and I think that was really valuable too, especially for like orchestral things that I need to do and like really solidified firm hand position and stuff. But what I like especially about the Vance method is how it's laid out. So you kind of have like a pedagogical plan in front of you, and you don't need to sort of draw from all resources and decipher them for your students. I think that's one thing I remember being in like middle and high school, looking at the Simandl books and playing the exercises, but not exactly understanding why I was doing that. So I think with Vance books, it's easier to help your student understand why they're doing what they're doing, which I think is really important, even if you're 10 or 12 or whatever. And of course, the physical accessibility of it is also really exciting. Like starting in third position is something that I had never thought of before. And when I heard Francois talk about it last year, I was like, oh, that makes sense. Being able to teach all 6 positions right away instead of thinking that's hard, I can't play up high, and having songs that they know and that they like instead of just abstract sort of things. There are just so many benefits to using that.
As I think over the years, how many times I've used Kolstein products, it's just amazing. I look at my bass right now, which has on the same bib that I bought while in high school. That's a Kolstein's bib. I can't believe that this thing is still kicking, but I have my pencils and my rosin and all those other accessories in my bib. And when I look inside my bib, I see my Kolstein rosin, which Peter Lloyd and so many other bass players use. I enjoy their Ultra rosin, and I have my Kolstein instrument cleaner that I've used for years and years to keep my bass looking good and clean. They've got Varicore strings, which Michael Klinghoffer loves to use, especially on student basses. They've got quivers, stands, so much more. Learn more about their accessories, their beautiful pedigree instruments, and so much more at Kolstein.com. This episode is brought to you by Robertson and Sons Violins. For more than 40 years, over 4 decades, Robertson and Sons has specialized in providing the highest quality stringed instruments and bows to collectors, professional musicians, music educators, and students of all ages. Their modern facility, which is totally beautiful, by the way, if you're ever able to make it out to Albuquerque, New Mexico, I highly recommend it. They have a recital hall that they use not only for performances, but it's available to their clients. So if you want to try out a fine pedigree bass or even a student bass or anything in between, you can go in that recital hall. I've had the chance to do that. Totally amazing. I'm like a kid in the candy store when I'm down there at Robertson's. Check them out online at robertsonsviolins.com. And thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. Yeah, no, I agree so strongly. And it's funny, I've thought a lot about Samandal, and I really do think that that's the way I end up using those skills you learn all the time in orchestra. Yeah. I think that really resembles a lot of orchestra parts. Like I totally get what you get out of it, but yeah, there's something about playing bigger intervals, fifths and sixths and thirds and playing in a register that's just a little easier to hear, not having to open your hand as much, in third position. And I've, like you, I've used that method with people that are in school, in the public schools. And there's some roadblocks I think we all run into. One is, okay, now we've got these positions, first, second, third, fourth, fifth, sixth. And then we have these other things that they may be learning or not in school. How do you deal with the conflicting position systems with your students?
Well, I should say also that I use a combination of Vance and Samandal because all of my students are enrolled in orchestra programs in Houston. And so they need to know things that they wouldn't learn like early on in the Vance books. But I was really curious about that issue at first too. But something Dennis suggested to me that's worked really well is to just name the methods separately and make sure the student knows when they're doing which thing. So with the little ones, sometimes we just like call them funny names, but with the older ones, I say like, okay, your teacher in orchestra is going to call it this, and that's great. And so when we're using that music, we will use this position system. But when we're in lessons and we start with these songs that you're learning, we're going to use this one. So from time to time, I just review with them and have them point them out to me on the bass. All my students have little whiteout dots in the 6 positions. And I think it's fine to know both, and they've seemed to receive that just fine, oh, that's right, this is third position in orchestra, so it helps. But I think them having a visual map too of those positions and being able to match them up like with harmonics and not go like, oh, this is half first, they seem to do well with that, so it hasn't been a big problem.
How long is a typical lesson for you? Is it like 25 minutes, 50 minutes, an hour? Maybe it varies, but what does that time look like for you?
So I offer during the semester half-hour or full-hour lessons, and a lot of that depends on how much time they have because they're in orchestra class when I come to the school. And it also depends on their age and their level of playing. So my high school students have hour-long lessons for the most part, unless they just don't have enough time with how many students I have in that class period. And my middle school students usually take half-hour lessons. However, during the summer, I'm teaching out of my home, and so they need to drive to me, which is kind of a long haul. So I just only offer less hour-long lessons during the summer.
So, and I have no answer for this myself, but I think about this all the time. So I love your thoughts. So I just taught 4 hours yesterday to 4 very different levels of student. That we did everything from Meshach to book 1 of Vance. But I don't know that I have like I'm still working on my lesson flow, even though I've been teaching 25 years. I'm still trying. Do you have like if you have an hour lesson, do you have kind of a general script for that lesson? Like we do X for 10 minutes, then we do 20 minutes of this, or do you have any sort of tropes or things that you follow for different levels of student?
Yeah, so this is something that I sort of developed toward the end of the year and into the summer, because when I first started like I knew what I wanted to touch on, but of course it's my first year with a full studio like that and with so many different age ranges. So when I would come during the year, it was more about like, let's work on whatever you need to be successful in orchestra right now. And of course, we would always start with tuning long tones in a scale, just to get started in the bass mind frame instead of whatever was going on with them during the day. But now I felt like the summer, my goal for them would be to use the lesson as a model for how they could practice when they were not with me. And so I always have them tune when they start and make sure that they set up the exact same way every single time. And we have a mirror so they can look at themselves. And then we tune, and then they play for me whatever scale they were going to work on the past week. And we use the vademecum for that, just so they can see, the fingerings and everything. And then after that, we work on whatever song that they were learning from the Vance book, or if they'd like to do their Simandl etude first, that's fine. So I let them choose. Usually Vance, because then we can progress forward in terms of like what positions they know and what notes, because a lot of them haven't learned anything in thumb position yet in orchestra. And then for the older ones, they have like region excerpt stuff that they're working on right now, so we do that. And then we finally end with a bass duet of some kind. So if they're younger, then I pull it from what they've worked on in the Vance books. But when they're older, I have like some books that I got from the music library at UH and just some other duet books that I have, and we pick one and then we work on sight reading with it, because I have these practice logs for them, and the last thing is sight reading. So we always do that, and since I'm lucky enough that their parents are in my studio while I'm teaching the lesson during the summer, we turn around and we perform for them at the end, so that they get the practice of performing for somebody every single week. So that's kind of the way it goes. It's been working so well.
Oh, I love that. I love that. Finishing it off with a perform. What a cool way to end. Yeah, I found just total random sidebar. The sight reading thing is always such a tricky thing for me, because it's like to find a good level of piece for the student, and then once you've read something, you're not really sight reading it anymore. So it's like, I got to find more. And I found this iPad app that I just love. It's called SR Machine. And thing, it is the most useful thing I have found for sight reading, because you can make it drop dead simple. You can make it like whole notes just going between G, A, and B or something, and you can go all the way up to dynamics and articulations and register and whatever key you want. And it will either, you can just play it, or you can play it and it will play along with you, and there'll be like a little cursor following, or just the cursor will go with the metronome, and then it gets done with the one, and then it just generates a new one. Oh,
that's amazing.
Oh, it has been so useful for and it's the sort of thing like I do it with a student, and I've been doing it for like 5 minutes a lesson when they have. I should probably do it every lesson, but like when they have something coming up, like an audition or whatever, and it has worked so well. So whoever made that app, thank you. And I wish that it was available for something besides iPad, like desktop or something. There's probably something online you can do too, but so that's super cool.
That's very cool.
What do you think? What do you see down the road for yourself? And again, apologies for the big question, but like, what do you see yourself doing in 5 years? What do you see yourself doing in 10 years? How clear is that vision for you?
So whenever I first started school, I was like, oh, I'm going to have an orchestra job. And that was like as far as my vision went at first. And I think within the next few years, that is still my goal. I would like to do that while continuing to teach. However, I really love what Dr. Schimek does with his clinicking and traveling to teach people. And I love to see clinicians come in and, give like a solo recital and then teach after that. So I would love to sort of follow that eventually. So that I'm really interested in that. I also have experience teaching with El Sistema, and I loved that as well. So I would love to integrate sort of maybe that into my career again later as well.
What can you I should have a clear understanding of what it means to be teaching in an El Sistema program. Obviously I know Venezuela and the program there, but I've always been a little vague on how that translates into a program in the States. Like I know you were doing that in Oklahoma City. How was that structured? What did you do with it? Can you just talk about that a little bit?
Sure. So it's actually called El Sistema Oklahoma, and it's an El Sistema inspired program. So it's not directly affiliated with the actual original El Sistema, but it's inspired from them. And this particular program, I think, started 5 or 6 years ago with like just a handful of really excited faculty who were just committed to making this program work. And now I think that they have 250 or close to that students on their campus, and they have a huge faculty, maybe 40 people. And so it is Oklahoma City University partnered with the St. Luke's United Methodist Church, and it is after school, so they start around 3 for their older students coming in after school, and then officially at 4 o'clock. And every day the students are bused there from their school, and they get something to eat so that they're, focused and nourished and ready to learn. And they have like this rotating schedule. It may have changed a little since I was there, but they have lessons in whatever, like group lessons, group class in whatever instrument that they're playing. And then they have either a composition class or some kind of creative music class. So they learn in there some theory and some components of like world music or making music together in a group. And then they have their full orchestra. And so it is, I think they have 3 orchestras right now. And it's by age group and also by ability. So they usually have a beginner orchestra. The last year that I was there, it was strings only. So we started string players that year. And then the year after that, they were going to start a new crop of wind players and, so on. And then they have 2 more advanced orchestras that have been working with them for a few years. But it was really exciting because we were teaching them, to be musicians, but it was really just a model for an excellent community. And so the whole goal of that program was to teach them to be good members of a community and to relate well to each other. So
very cool. How either in Oklahoma or now at the University of Houston, how the heck do you balance your time? being a student, which is busy enough, and I go back and think about my own experience. I was at Northwestern. I was in the civic orchestra. I was doing a little teaching, not nearly as much as what you've been doing, it seems. But like, how do you fit in practice time? Obviously you're continuing to progress and improve. How do you balance all that stuff? I think a lot of people are probably struggling with that out there.
Very carefully. So I am obsessed with my iPhone calendar. And it keeps me sane. So I am able, luckily, to fit in everything pretty well, but pretty tightly in my schedule during the week. And so with my master's degree, I would take probably 1 academic or classroom course at a time, and then I have like lessons with Dennis, and then my large ensemble. And so that usually leaves me like a pretty good block of time during the business day for teaching. So I'll have like either something in the morning or something in the afternoon, and whatever time isn't used by that, I will drive to wherever and teach for like a handful of hours at a time, because my schools are like at least 20 to 30 minutes away from U of H. And then practice time comes in the morning and evening to like bookend that. And of course, on weekends, I have more time for myself and those things that I want to accomplish outside of the school and outside of my studio. But I mean, it is a lot, but it works very nicely for me, and it keeps me busy, and I love it.
Well, talk to me about those, and I'm just remembering back to my experiences being in school, and I was always a morning practicer, and I was always like a disaster in the evening trying to practice. It would always end in frustration. So I learned that about myself. What do you do during those times? Are they similar or different? Like, let's say you get a morning session and an evening session, I don't know, most days. What are you doing the same thing both times? Do you have like a morning routine and an evening routine? What does that look like structurally for you?
It depends on the day if I get to do both or if I need to pick just morning or just evening. But Dennis has these fabulous practice routines that are posted on the door of his office, and they are like alphabetized lists. So like A is this, B is that, and they're sort of prescriptions for different amounts of time available. So I really appreciated the opportunity to hone in on structuring how I practiced that way. So I've been sort of using those over the past year, and they always start with silence and tonalization, and then they move into like warm up things, and then so if I have like a couple hours in the morning and then a little bit in the evening, like the morning ones would be like a scale workout for like an hour, maybe from Francois's book, and then just various exercises that I've received during my lessons, so I can combine those just for different focuses, what I want to work on that day. And then separate from that, usually I would work on rep, maybe at the end of the day or something like that, and then just end the same way that I began. If I have less time, if I only have like an hour that day or something, then I would just put all of that into 1 hour and make it just a mirror image. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. This episode is brought to you by D'Addario Strings. Our friends at D'Addario want to help listeners change their strings safely and efficiently, and they have a few tricks to help you achieve that. Did you know that you can tell the difference between D'Addario strings by the silking? Peg and silking denotes pitch and tension. So E is green, A is black, D is yellow, and G is red. C, by the way, is purple if you have a C string. A thin band of yellow just before the metal winding denotes light tension, and a thin orange band of silking denotes heavy tension. Ball end silking, that's the stuff down by the tailpiece, denotes string family like Kaplan, Helicore, or Zyx. Learn more at orchestral.daddario.com, and thank you so much for sponsoring the podcast. This episode is brought to you by the good folks at Upton Bass String Instrument Company. Eric and Gary and the whole Upton team, I can't say enough good things about them. And they have been on board with the various endeavors I've done online from the start. They were one of the early sponsors of the blog back in 2006 and 2007. And it has been so fun to follow along with their journey and see them develop these new models of basses like the car bass, the Bostonian, the Bohemian, and to connect with all these amazing players. I've had the privilege of speaking with so many people that play Upton basses, from Eric Rivas of Branford Marsalis' band and Lucia Torino of The Devil Makes Three, all the way over to Anthony Monzo of the New Century Chamber Orchestra, and Kevin Smith, Willie Nelson's bass player. I've had many students purchase Upton basses over the years. I've had a lot of colleagues play Upton basses. I see them on gigs all the time. They play great, and Upton stands behind their work. Can't recommend them highly enough. Check them out online at uptonbass.com. But I want to highlight, it sounds like a good percentage of your time is spent on technique, or if we want to call it abstract technique. I think that's and people listening might be thinking like, wow, an hour-long scale workout. What? And shout out to Dennis. By the way, I'll make sure to link up to his interview because he's like a practicing scientist. I just love talking to him about those things. But like an hour scale workout, can you break that down a little bit, what that might look like? Like, are you just running an A major scale as fast as you can for an hour? I'm assuming not, right?
I guess I should clarify. So the scale combinations that Francois has in his third book, where it has the different fingerings and then the different bowings. If you play through that at a reasonable tempo, not trying to just build up speed necessarily, but trying to work on just beautiful sound and intonation, or, if you're working on the bow, then just working on your different bow strokes. It takes about an hour to just play that straight through. And I think it helps build up endurance a lot. And so, especially because I didn't have really any experience with the robot technique until the past year or so, I'm interested in really developing that area of my technique more than I had. So it is a lot of time spent on those things, but I think they're tools that I can use, when I go to rep later. So that's kind of the idea.
No, it's great. Do you sticking with the just practicing topic? Do you do any sort of practice journal? Do you organize things on paper in any sort of way, or is it in your iPhone calendar, or do you do any sort of external organizing, or do you just kind of you have a mental idea of what you're going to do?
So it had been more of a mental idea, but I have some new they're not my ideas on it, but some new inspiration from this past workshop. So Etienne Lafrance was there teaching, and he was talking about some really great ideas on how to structure a practice journal and plan out what you would like yourself to do. So I'm really interested in trying that, because I had, done various practice journaling before, but it was more recording what I had learned or worked on that day rather than planning out in front of me what I was going to do. So I'll be excited to try that. It involves short-term, mid-term, and long-term goals. And he also suggests that you include personal ones as well as practice ones. So it's kind of like a holistic approach, which is cool,
Yeah, it's very cool. And it can be so helpful for some, maybe not everybody, for some people to organize it like that. I am actually going to go visit this startup here in San Francisco. They actually are on the street I live on Montgomery Street here in San Francisco. Cool. They make an app called Modeacity, which is a practicing app based on cognitive science principles. And it's super interesting. Yeah. I downloaded it a few days ago, and it's all based around recording yourself, but then it also has all these practice tools built in, like metronome and drone. And then it has this really interesting sort of artificial intelligence aspect. This is the sort of thing I've been hoping would appear someday, and so I'm super excited about. I was using it yesterday for my own practicing. You can say, like, what do you hope to accomplish? And it's like, I want to play better in tune. And then so you record it, and then it asks you these questions and kind of learns. It's very cool. So anybody out there, it's free, I think, or it was free for me to download. Modeacity. I know it's iPhone and Android. So anyway,
that sounds very cool.
It's very cool, and it's a nice. I've always been a big fan of writing stuff down. I've got my iPad right here with all my notes for chatting with you, but my poor mom has all these practice journals from all the years and closets at home.
Sure.
So getting it on a digital device might be nice.
Yeah. I also heard of something that Nick Walker likes to use, which is like a gym buff app of some kind, where you put, if you're working on technique, then you can enter like whichever exercises that you'd like to do that day, and it times you, and it blows like a little cute whistle when it's time to switch to the next thing, so that instead of obsessing over a technique for like 20 minutes, then you do it for a short amount of time every single day, and then develop quicker that way. So I'll be really interested to try that as well.
That's a great idea. I didn't realize that he did that, but that makes so much sense, because there's so many correlations between working out and practicing. I mean, really, I've been trying to use those sort of techniques in my own sort of computer, whatever it is I do work, and like taking breaks and making sure I'm like doing X amount for a certain amount each day and stuff. So I think that cross-discipline, learning is really, really useful. Wow. That's I'm gonna experiment with that too. What Texas Music Festival you helped out with, right, this year?
I did. I was on staff for that this year.
Okay. Tell me a little bit about that event, because I was seeing some photos of you there, and I know you were doing the housing. Were you coordinating that for that?
Yes, I was.
Where does that event happen? And just tell me a little bit about that.
Sure. So it's hosted by the Morse School of Music at the University of Houston. And so all of the festival events, master classes, lessons, rehearsals, and everything, and the performances for the most part take place in the Morse School. And so they use, the faculty offices for lessons, and they use our large spaces for just lots of master classes during the week. They offer yoga for musicians, Alexander technique sessions, and that sort of thing. And then they use our Moore's Opera House for the orchestra concerts. And so the Orchestra Institute, which is like the big chunk of that festival, is it's a month long, and so the orchestra offers a concert every Saturday during that month. So they have five rehearsals a week, from Monday through Friday, with a new conductor each week in that space, and then they give a concert. And then the participants and the faculty both live on campus, and so we use the dorms and the dining facility there, in the apartments for the faculty. So,
cool.
Yeah.
It looks like ever since you've been playing bass pretty much, and certainly since you've been at OCU and now University of Houston, it seems like events have been a big part of what you do, going to bass events like KC Bass Workshop, or helping out with John Schimek's event, or what we did together at Kate Jones's event. And I feel like I'm always on a quest when I'm working with students or someone comes and plays for me that it's like, what should I need to get the next step, take the next step. And I've just found that if someone goes to an event like that, that's the spark that sort of takes them to the next level. Can you just talk about your experience with events like that? Like, why should someone, because obviously it's time and resources. You got to spend the money to get somewhere. You got to, it's a commitment. How have events played into your development, and like, what might you tell somebody about the benefits of doing something like KC Bass, the Oklahoma City workshop, or whatever it might be?
That's a really great question. I think they have been like a huge resource to me during my time, even, all the way back to when I met Dr. Schimek, and I didn't realize how important it was, like a gathering of bass players and bass faculty. But I think being able to make connections with people who are out there in the field doing, what you aspire to do as a student every day, and watching them teach and them play for you, and seeing them model what it's like to be the kind of musician that you want to be and the kind of professional that you want to be is invaluable. I think just especially like with this past workshop, seeing them interact with one another, watching the professional bass community right in front of your eyes, sort of gives you an idea of like what the bass world is, or what the music world is, and how you can plug into it. And I think those faculty give great examples of, lots of details of how you can craft yourself as a musician and what mindset you might like to be in order to be successful. You can learn how to structure your practice, for instance, or a big thing in this past workshop was just getting comfortable getting up in front of a group of people and performing for them, realizing that it's not about you, it's about sharing your music with the group. So I think just having like a very strong idea of what the bass community is comes from the workshops, and getting just new ideas on how to become part of that.
Yeah, it's so valuable. We just did the Golden Gate Bass Camp here in San Francisco,
right.
and I still, to this day, I feel like I learn more in a week than I do in a year. Being at an event like that, and I come away so inspired, and it's been like that for me ever since my first bass event was with Jeff Braditich, one of his master classes in like 1991 or something like that. And ever since then, those are like the steps on my staircase of learning. I think is like I really feel like I come away a different player, a different thinker, so okay, that's very cool.
I agree. I think, there's just so much that's great about them. I think getting new ideas on technique is great too. And another thing that I love, especially about Dr. Schimek's bass camps, is the opportunity to play in bass ensembles. I know I'm talking about bass events a lot, not just musical events in general, but that's something that I really love is bass ensemble, and we focused on that a ton during those camps. So the chance to play chamber music, with other voices that sound the same as yours is very cool. And so that's something else I love about those bass events.
So bass ensembles, and I've been doing more and more bass ensemble related stuff living out here in San Francisco. So I've got some top favorite. If you had to name some desert island bass ensemble composers right up there, like for give me a few names that you like to. Who are some go-to arrangers or composers that you've been digging into or enjoying?
Yeah, it's funny. So during my undergrad, well, I know they still do this and they always have done this, but Dr. Schimek will take the studio on tour at the end of every year, like a regional tour, and we will go and perform for schools and play pieces and then talk about them to the students. And we did this for the American String Teachers Association convention this year and for the TCU Bass Festival. And it was like a joke among the studio because we had like 10 Tony Osborne pieces for our ensemble. And he showed up a lot during my time there. He has all kinds of just really awesome, exciting pieces for bass ensemble. But aside from that, there were also lots of cool arrangements of pieces for other types of ensemble. And Dr. Schimek does a lot of arranging as well. So we were able to access, all genres of music, and no matter what it was originally written for, we could use it for the bass ensemble. So we did, let's see here, like an Ave Maria from Tomás Luis de Vitoria, and we then did Home on the Range with Toto's Africa sort of infused in the middle. So, it's like a wide range that you can access.
Oh, that's beautiful. I love it.
Yeah.
Yeah, Tony Osborne, the green bass blues. I can't tell you how many times I've got choreography I have people do with that, and it's such a hit, and it's so nice to find bass ensembles that don't have like a screaming high treble clef part. If you just don't have people that are doing that yet. So yeah, no, he's a favorite of mine for sure.
Yeah, and speaking of treble clef, I recall a bass camp at OCU where I was not really a treble clef reader or a sixth position player, and Dr. Schimek put me on part 1 of Harry Potter, which he had arranged, and I was baptized by fire into reading treble clef during that week. So it's a fun way to expand your horizons too, I think.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, this has got to be the first of many conversations because I love having people back and I like thinking of as this is like an introduction, and then we can chat, any sort of topic or anything you've got coming up, and it'll be really fun to see what the future holds for you. I know it's going to be great, whatever it is.
Thank you.
And I usually end with some sort of advice for your younger self. And it's always kind of fun for someone who's like in their masters. Because if I said, give your 18-year-old self some advice, it's not really that long ago. But if you wanted to go back and talk to like Grace just about to go off to college, or anybody in that position, thinking about music school or music in some capacity, and they're going off to start, what would you tell young Grace or someone in kind of your shoes?
I think for young Grace, who was about to go into college, I would tell myself to look for somebody who does what I want to do. And I did do that, but I think that's important for, I guess other people of that age to know that if, you're looking for a school, it's not about them having a big name or having a big program or whatever. You need to find a teacher and a program that's going to be an excellent model of what it is that you aspire to do. And you need to go and make sure you take a lesson that teacher and see how you connect with them and how they can broaden your horizons. But I think for my even younger self, I would have said to like really pay attention to why you're playing what you're playing and why you're doing what you're doing. And that, like I think I mentioned before, that's a goal for me with my students, because I think a lot of the time we just like do what the teacher told us or whatever, or, just do our best to do what's on the stand in front of us. But I think you can learn a lot from thinking about why you're doing that and what you have to offer based on that experience. So.
Yeah, for sure. No, I wish I could go back and tell like 15-year-old Jason pay a little more attention to the details. Grace, thank you so much for chatting. Folks, check out Grace on her website, gracelewisbass.com, and you can follow her on Instagram. And I can't wait to see where Grace ends up in 5 years, 10 years. This is the first of undoubtedly many conversations over the years on the podcast with Grace. So thanks for chatting, Grace. Really appreciate it. And thank you for listening to this. Maybe this is your first episode. Maybe it's your 510th or whatever number episode this is. But I really appreciate having you along on the journey. If you ever want to get in touch and suggest a guest or anything like that, feedback@contrabassconversations.com will put you in touch with me. And I love hearing from people who listen to the show. I hear from people from all over the world, and it just makes me so thrilled. You can subscribe to the podcast, and there are many different ways to do that. Google Podcasts, Apple Podcasts. We have our own app. You can get on our email list, and we'll send you info about the weekly podcast, plus a little extra bass news that's going on in the world. And that would be great. So however you want to get in touch, and social media, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, all that good stuff, we're there. Contrabass Conversations is produced by Michael Cooper, Steve Hinchy, Trevor Jones, and Mitch Mooring. I mentioned Mitch at the beginning of the episode. He was the person who recommended Grace to me most recently. That Mitch makes a beautiful bass, more than one bass, in the Dallas area. MitchMooring.com will get you more information on that. And thank you to Krista Copper for going through and cataloging and organizing and sussing out the topics that we talk about. We've got some highlight episodes coming up here, and they're totally a result of Krista, so thank you so much. I'm your host, Jason Heath, coming to you from San Francisco, California, and we will see you again soon for more life on the low end of the spectrum.